The Biden administration authorizes missile strikes deep into Russian territory. Is this the last petulant act of a dying lame duck administration, or have they actually decided to kick off World War III? Let's take a look. Hello, everyone. Dr. Chris Martenson at Peak Prosperity here. I want to talk about this. This came out over the weekend. Not a big fan of weekend releases of major news, and I'm particularly not a fan of what just happened here. As you know, I am not a fan of war at all. As an act of last defense, when all diplomacy has failed, if your country is being attacked, I get it. But as a first act and as a neocon strategy for getting the way in the world, not a fan. War is destructive. It's deadly. It makes enemies, not friends. That's how it goes. So this came out. According to the New York Times, the Biden administration has for the first time authorized the Ukrainian military, let's put quotes around that for a minute, to use U.S.-supplied long-range missiles, including ATACMs against Russian territory. Okay, listen, this could lead to World War III. Putin has been very clear about that. Talk about that more in just a second. But two things I have to ask. First, when they say the Biden administration has authorized. First, this is an act of war. Constitutionally, and I know we don't follow that much in the United States anymore, but constitutionally, an act of war needs to be, well, it needs a congressional resolution. It needs war to be declared. This is an act of war, not just sort of like we're going to beat up on Panama today or Grenada. This is directly attacking a nuclear superpower with U.S. supplied, targeted, maintained, and fully trained and operationalized U.S. help. Let's be very clear. That's why I put quotes around Ukraine. Ukraine isn't doing any of this stuff. Maybe a Ukrainian officer presses a button at the end of the whole thing, but these things are built, shipped, maintained, set up, and then most importantly, provided with targeting information, right? Which is a very sensitive thing. That's not just like, where is this thing on a GPS map, but where are all the other radar assets? How do we fly around those? When would we launch? When are there satellite dark periods? Like, there's a lot of things you need to know. Plus, can we fire these things and scoot away? So we have to know where all the battlefield assets are that could detect the launch and then maybe take them back out, etc. Obviously, that's not something Ukraine is doing all by itself, even minimally. So Russia in the past, through Putin, has said, look, if you reach in with these things, we understand all of this. Putin explained all of that. He said, these will have been targeted and selected and maintained. All of this operationalizing of these long-range weapons requires NATO assets, in this case, U.S. assets, to be part of that. So this is not something a lame duck administration ought to be doing, right? Like willy-nilly. Second of all, we don't know who is the Biden administration. Like, did somebody sign a document to this effect saying, I authorize this? Was that Joe Biden? Because we know it wasn't him. He didn't think of it. He didn't conceive of it. He didn't write the document up. So who exactly is it that made this decision? Nobody can answer that question outside of the White House. Nobody out here knows. And by the way, the mainstream media isn't going to ask that question because they don't care. As they slide into irrelevancy, obviously they're not going to do anything about it either. Like, ask good questions as like, who is doing this and why? So we don't know any of that. But as Powman says down here, I am livid that one person can lead us to the end of humanity. WTF, exactly. This could lead to very unintended consequences. So there ought to be a national dialogue and a national debate. And none of these things are happening right now. It's just sort of people shrugging. What are you going to do? My friends, this is the neocons doing what neocons do. They come, they show up, and all that ever results is dust. They don't build anything, they break things. The neocons are world-class destroyers, destroyers of geopolitical bridges. They are destroyers of political capital. They're just physical destroyers of bridges and buildings and hospitals. It's who they are. We have to confront something, which is that not just the United States, but a lot of the Western countries are under neocon assault at this point in time from within. So when you think back to the WEF saying in 2016, Western values will have been tested to the breaking point, we asked the first question, which is, why just Western values? Why are Western values being tested to the breaking point? Who wants to break the Western society? Well, The WEF does, okay? And people like them and the hangers-on that associate with that. And by the way, this isn't just the U.S. As I mentioned, look, Germany, Berlin has now decided in the wake of this that they're going to send ATAC UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, to Kiev with artificial intelligence called a mini Taurus, writes the German newspaper Bild. A total of 4,000 Helsing drones will be transported. No good. Or we might consider what Putin has said about all of this at this point in time. Listen, the same people that told us, according to Che's Bo here, which I think is correct, Che Bo's, the same people that told us we were winning in Vietnam, that Saddam was about to attack you, that Afghanistan was a win, Biden as sharp as attack. Yeah, these people, you know what they do? They lie, and they lie all the time. So let's listen in to this particular set of lies right here, and it starts with hearing from Putin.
И мы же двигаемся к НАТО, а НАТО двигается к нам. Поэтому говорить о том, что Россия ведет себя агрессивно, по меньшей мере.
So he said there, for anybody just listening in, because it's if you don't speak Russian, in the text below, he said, the translation is, we didn't move towards NATO. NATO is moving towards us and doing it aggressively, and it's aggressively at odds, of course, with common sense. So NATO's infrastructure is coming towards us, he says.
President Putin actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that.
Oh, did you hear that from Jens Stoltenberg, former head of NATO, now being headed up by the odious Mark Rutte of Holland? Just awful. But at any rate, you hear that? It's like, oh no, it's a precondition for Russia not invading Ukraine. He said, well, we don't want any more of your NATO expansion because, of course, when NATO expands, we put these missiles and weapon systems right on their border. And then, of course, once you have them there, it's Russia feels that's a threat, as anybody would. Can you imagine if some hostile foreign power was like putting missiles all across in Mexico or Canada for the United States? We'd think that was unacceptable. However, this is how NATO rolls, and NATO exists of, by, and for the military contractors. Their whole job is they're just the marketing arm for a bunch of people who like to make money building weapon systems that happen to kill people. That has been the model for my entire adult life, and this is where we are. But we have to call these lies out for what they are. And when these lies lead to dangerous provocations that could lead to World War III, my friends, this affects all of us. We all need to know about this. And we either put up with this, we shrug, we say, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that? As Tony Soprano might say, what are you going to do? Or we say, enough, time out, stop, no more. These neocons in this mindset, it's a very destructive, dangerous mindset. And we should be done with this, because I will tell you, we do not have either the funding or the energy to continue to wage world wars and blow things up and sort of shrug and say, well, I guess we can rebuild those things. There will come a day when we don't have the energy to rebuild what we used to have because we blew it up and the energy isn't there actually to rebuild it, or the resources aren't there to rebuild it. Why do this? It is one of the stupidest, most destructive things we can do. And we shouldn't be doing it. So let's continue to listen, though, as this lie is exposed.
So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders.
Flashback.
This is fundamentally not about NATO expansion.
It's never about NATO enlargement.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO expanding toward Russia.
This was never about NATO.
It's absolutely nothing to do with NATO expansionism.
And it has nothing to do with NATO.
This is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not really about NATO.
This is not about NATO.
Seriously, it's not about NATO.
This was never about NATO.
It was never about NATO. Let's be honest.
This doesn't have anything to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO at all.
Yeah, he's claiming it's like security purposes, but we can see the clear reason.
But NATO is not the reason.
This is not about NATO expansion. This is about the democratic expansion.
Ukraine bans religious organizations.
We are protecting democracy right now.
Ukraine is banning political parties.
Because it's a democracy.
Ukraine restricts books and music.
It's about democracy.
Ukraine won't hold elections.
It's about democracy.
And it's not about NATO expansion.
This war in Ukraine is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
That's not about NATO.
It has nothing to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO expansion.
It's not about...
And it goes on. Well done putting that clip together. Listen, we're tired of this. We're tired of the lies. They just lie. And they lie and they repeat the lie and they repeat it often enough. Some people absorb it and say, oh, I guess that's truth, right? It's not truth. We've been lied to the whole way through. And they do it because, I don't know, it gives them political power and they get money out of the deal and all of that. But it's not appropriate. And we can't afford to do this anymore. Like physically, literally, energetically, monetarily, on every basis, we cannot afford to do this anymore. And yet these are the kinds of people who are in power. And so as I've been writing about and talking about with people quite a lot lately is, we've seen this great weaponization that's happened of what I would call this narrative structure. And it infects some people's minds and it really breaks things for some people. So we saw this happen over and over again in the space of healthcare, right? And then we saw it arrayed against Trump with such lethality that it's broken families. It's destroyed relationships. It's broken those bonds. And so I think we got to be honest about something here, which is that the narrative structure we do have right now is got a very powerful set of tools behind it. And it's being used and weaponized to wreck things for a lot of people. And so let me find this right now because this is kind of astonishing to me. So let's start with this. First, the Guardian, the UK newspaper, just announced they will no longer post on X because of far-right conspiracy theories and racism. Hey, listen, if you can't stand up in the free scrum of ideas where the one side isn't just shouted down or censored or shadow banned so that you appear to actually be winning the argument, if you are so weak that you cannot orate effectively to be persuasive, well, then you might as well scurry off and pretend like that it's because it's just the bad environment. Truth is, the Guardian is full of weak, insipid people. And by the way, they're asking for donations because they're funded directly by you, they say. Well, actually, they forgot to mention the $10 million they get from Bill Gates, who, by the way, just personifies weak, insipid human being as far as I'm concerned. He can't possibly do the proper thing and convince you of his position. So he's going to buy the research, buy the journals, buy the newspapers, buy the narrative, and just ram it down your throat because he's fundamentally a weak human being who is incapable of forming a persuasive argument on the basis of logic and common sense and merits that has that undergirding of the good stuff that really makes an argument stand, which is ethics and morality and integrity. He's missing that stuff. I get it. So he has to do what he can do, but it's weak. So imagine this, though. So we went from before the election, Biden and Kamala Harris and 1,000 mouthpieces speaking for them, saying that Trump is literally Hitler. And we went from that to, well, that's about as chipper and as happy as I've seen Joe Biden in many a month. Like, what is leading to such obvious glee in this moment in time? So as Topher wrote here, the liberals really can't handle this picture because if you look, it's just, that would be hard to take because maybe they're too stupid to realize that the fascist Hitler dictator, blah, blah, fell into, it was all political theater. None of it was actually, it was, they didn't believe it. They didn't believe the political theater, but unbelievable with that. And then, yeah, not that. Hold on. Where did I put it? Here it is. So this is interesting from Colin Rugg again, who's just got great tweets all the time. Morning Joe then, Donald Trump comparable to Hitler. And now, well, can't we just settle our differences? Let's look at this. This is astonishing.
And then he says that the news network that is most critical of him should be taken off the air. This is not a reach. I could go back and talk about Nazi Germany, and I do it without any concerns whatsoever. And if people can't start drawing the parallels, well, you're just stupid, or you have your head in the sand, or you're one of them.
Over the past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people, from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues.
Yeah, whatever. One thing you didn't talk about, Joe, is your integrity and lack thereof. This must be astonishing because these are the people who are hyperventilating. Of course, it was a shtick. It was not something they earnestly believed in. They just repeated endlessly, Trump is literally Hitler. Now, why would you literally go to meet with literally Hitler unless you didn't literally believe that, right? Obviously, they thought that their political bread or their personal power or ability to reach people, their egos, then were fed by saying one thing, and now they realize the political winds have shifted, and so they're just like changed their spots, right? These chameleons have new colors and spots on them, and this is what they're going to say now, because of course this is just what you do when you have no integrity and you're just a windsock, right? A political windsock. So that's what it is. But a lot of people took this very seriously and have canceled Thanksgiving and have canceled Christmas and have yelled at their own relatives because they actually believed this malarkey. They fell for it. Now, why they did, what it means, how lasting the damage is, whole lot of set of questions. I've answered this, and we've been addressing this back at Peak Prosperity for quite a while now. And one of my most potent pieces was just produced this last Friday, and it talks about free will, the agency of free will in this whole thing, and the weaponization of the narrative structure to the point that it has infected some people, to the point that they're deeply, deeply unhappy. They've severed connections with family members. Some of them have gotten their tubes tied. They're desperately afraid that somehow the world has just turned dark and against them. It is a powerful thing. If you ascribe to something that takes your happiness away, then you have ascribed to the wrong thing. My definition of a cult is an organized system of thinking that works against your better interest. It takes your money. It takes your lover. Vow of chastity for you. That's why the guru gets your gal, right? Or it takes your happiness away. Listen, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The founding fathers had it right. This is that's the bedrock of what makes a life worth living. When you have that base layer all sort of mapped out, you can get to that next layer of self-actualization and contentment and figuring out your actual life purpose here and why you're here and coming into your own agency and power so that you can find your special gifts and bring them to the world. That's what life is all about. But if you are constantly in an emotionally exhausted and triggered state of anxiety, fear, anger, hostility, envy, retribution, that's where Joe and Mika were keeping people for a long time. And I feel bad for them, but not 100% bad, because on some level, each of us consents to giving up that power. And a lot of people did. They consented. They handed it over to these people. Here, you tell me what to think and how to feel. And in return, you know what they got? They were fed a load of bull manure. And it just doesn't taste good. So that's where we've been. Unfortunately, it did damage a lot of families. It did damage a lot of people. So what does that actually mean? If you want to know really how to decode that, come back to Peak Prosperity. Check out that piece on free will. I do these things every week where I have one big giant thing where my guarantee, I'm your information scout. I'm going to think deeply about something. I'm going to provide some context, and it's going to get the juices flowing. So if you're intellectually curious and you want to know how the world is put together, and you're interested in knowing kinds of things you can do to, well, get ready for whatever's coming next, Peak Prosperity is absolutely the right place for you. We have a lot of very, very thoughtful people there. I learn from them just as much as they learn from me, and it's a wonderful community. I'm inviting you to come join us there. Now, I'm going to carry on with this scouting report back for my Peak Prosperity subscribers, because we got a lot of other stuff we got to talk about, including the degree to which the medical industrial tyranny complex is now scrambling and what it's likely to do next. But even if you don't come back, you don't become a part of Peak Prosperity, please, the one thing I'm going to advise you to do, and this is advice, is you need to become resilient. You need to become prepared, because the kinds of people who would authorize missile strikes randomly into Russia on a weekend are the same people who won't stop there. They will not stop until they've wrecked something, because that's who they are. They just turn things to dust. Families, relationships, cities. It's who they are. With that, thanks very much, and hope to see you at Peak Prosperity. Would love to have you there.